Since invading Ukraine, Putin's live stream speeches have often seemed unhinged. They've now got positively surreal. In his latest address from the Kremlin, he attacked cancel culture in the West and cited the treatment of Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling.
Didn't begin yesterday. We know this very well. In Hollywood, they avoided films even when they made films where the only winner, the country that defeated fascism, was the United States, and didn't say anything about the Red Army. But if you look at the number of military units fighting in the East, that was the Russian units. So they just canceled the contribution of the Red Army into the defeat of the Nazis. And in Japan, they don't even mention who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or they just say it was done by some abstract allies. And the fact that it was the United States who did such an awful slaughter at the end of the war, this fact is not even mentioned. So they just cancelled cynically this truth. They cancelled John Rowling recently, the children's author. Her books are published all over the world, even just because she didn't satisfy the demands of gender rights.
Must have been quite a surreal speech to be translating. You've got to sort of have a double take. Is he actually saying this? But, fair play to her for having the confidence to genuinely live tweet it. She didn't sound like she was having too many second thoughts. Aaron, is Russia, just like J.K. Rowling, being cancelled by the West?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking on this show for a few weeks, Michael, about what does Putin's off-ramp look like? Will it be a negotiated peace settlement, which means the Donbass region is given autonomy, or Crimea is recognized as Russian sovereign territory? Well, it may be that Vladimir Putin goes on the Joe Rogan Experience and gets a monthly column in The Observer talking about cancel culture, because he sounds increasingly like one of these reactionaries that you see on the US right, or indeed in this country on the so-called political center. It is nonsense. And like you say, imagine being that translator. Wait, he's talking about the author of Harry Potter? This is a war where Russia itself has lost, it seems, 10,000 soldiers. I mean, it's a huge conflict. We're seeing the most extensive economic sanctions imposed on a country in history. And you're talking about the author of a children's book and like LGBT rights. This isn't a coincidence. They do share, these people, not necessarily J.K. Rowling, but the kinds of people that go on to the Joe Rogan Experience and talk about cancel culture. And I love criticizing liberals and liberalism, right, Michael? But the thing they have in common is this idea of like a critique of liberal modernity and identity. They do share that, right? Somebody like Melanie Phillips and Vladimir Putin share criticisms and critiques on a whole range of issues. And people might think, oh, Aaron, you're going too far. That's really unfair on people that you politically disagree with domestically. No, he openly calls the West a decadent society. I mean, I think we have a decadence in our societies for very different reasons. I think it's because you've got people like Rishi Sunak and various other politicians worth tens of millions of pounds each. I think that's a problem of decadence, sure. But he leans into the idea that we're ideologically and ethically decadent as societies. And look, that's the calling card of many people who earn their keep writing columns and appearing on the BBC and going on BBC Question Time. Vladimir Putin and his points, his like talking points, could very easily be an audience member or a panelist on BBC Question Time. Seriously. And this is one of them, right?
I mean, what's interesting, because if you think about it sort of in relation to discourse about sort of cancel culture in this country, like we've often talked about how, channels like GB News explicitly started to say, we are going to be challenging cancel culture. And it wasn't even like a powerful enough argument or idea to make a successful cable show, a successful cable channel in the UK. And now Vladimir Putin is trying to use this as a talking point to justify, a completely unjustifiable war, but he's more talking to the Russian audience here. So this is supposed to, justify the loss of, potentially 10,000 Russian troops so far. It does seem a little bit desperate. I can't imagine that is going to really motivate the Russian people and think, yeah, this war is worth it. Let's watch the rest of Putin's rant about cancel culture.
They're not trying to cancel our country. I'm talking about the progressive discrimination of everything to do with Russia, this trend that's unfolding in a number of Western states with the full neglect or sometimes encouragement of Western cultures. They're now engaging in the cancel culture. They're even removing Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, Rachmaninoff from posters. Russian writers and their books are cancelled. There's now the latest program to cancel world literature was conducted by the Nazis in Germany 90 years ago. We remember that footage when they were burning books. It's impossible to imagine such a thing in our country, and we're insured against this thanks to our culture. And it's inseparable for us from our motherland, from Russia, where there is no place for ethnic intolerance, where for centuries representatives from dozens of ethnic groups have been living together. And cultural diversity is the pride of our society, the strength and priority of our state.
We have talked on this show about how the cultural boycott of Russia has gone too far and, potentially will play into Vladimir Putin's hands if it seems to Russian people like the rest of the world just hate sort of the concept of Russianness, not something that's directed necessarily at their government's policy, but Russia itself. That could, reinforce Vladimir Putin. But I just think sort of tied to the language of cancel culture, I can't see how that's going to be particularly persuasive to the Russian people. And on a moral level, this is a guy who's committing an ongoing war crime against the population of 40 million people. We don't even, really need to discuss that. That's an absolute given that this is an abhorrent person doing an abhorrent thing. But on specifically this issue of cancel culture, he also happens to be shutting down any independent media platform in his country. And he's just instituted a 15-year jail term for anyone who says anything about the war which he doesn't like. And by the way, they're not even allowed to call it a war. They have to call it a military operation. And this is a guy now complaining about cancel culture. I mean, Aaron, in a way, it seems odd that we're sort of, I'm trying to take down Vladimir Putin for inconsistency. I don't think he's someone who particularly cares, but it is still, it's odd, isn't it? It's very, very surreal to see this guy complain about people cancelling things, which is usually comes from the perspective of we are free speech absolutists. He's definitely not one of those.
The so-called tolerant West. You could have really leaned into this more, Michael. The so-called tolerant liberal West. And they could have maybe Putin destroys woke culture. Anyway, it is weird, and like you say, Michael, there's no point saying, "Oh, Putin's been inconsistent on this." No point. The guy has like MiG-24s and Spetsnaz and this huge military machine. He doesn't care. It's like Stalin's point with regards to the Pope. How many divisions does he have? It's a strange one to talk about, but I think also it does speak to something really important and profound, Michael, which is, and I'm sure many of our audience are aware of this, if you go into sort of far-right group chats on Telegram and so on, see their talking points, despite the fact, and it should be said, there is a big neo-Nazi presence within the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly their better armed units, so the Azov Brigade, for instance. Despite that, the European far-right is generally supporting Putin, which would be counterintuitive, wouldn't it? Of course, there is the fact that Putin has groomed, or Moscow, the Kremlin, has groomed the European far-right for a decade, spending money, giving money, sending people and thinkers over, offering loans. The Front National took a €9 million loan from Russian banks because no European banks would give them money. They were offered lines of credit up to €50 million. This is not an accident. So that's part of it. But also, I think you look at people like Tommy Robinson, you look at various far-right people, and they are searching for a post-liberal politics. And it boils Tucker Carlson. And I don't think Tucker Carlson should be as a traitor and treason, and he should, be given the death penalty or whatever these lunatics, these liberal lunatics are saying in the United States. But there is an important resonance here, which is all of these people are searching for a post-liberal settlement. No, I'm not a liberal, I'm a socialist, right? But I do agree with liberals on one thing, which is that individuals are uniquely placed to determine what happiness is and how they should live their lives. That's a liberal insight, which I agree with. And of course, the right doesn't. The right says, well, actually, what you think happiness is and what you want is secondary to tradition, authority, the state, how things have been done for generations. So it's a very different worldview. So it is not an accident that people critical of the most contemporary forms of liberal modernity, but which, by the way, doesn't always get things right. There's lots I disagree with about it as well. But there's a lesson for us on the left, which is if the entirety of your politics is premised on, shitting on the libs, you're going to end up in quite a weird place. You're going to end up in a place where people are denying women the right to abortion. You're going to be ending in a place where you've got people who are pro-arranged marriage or ethno-nationalism. And this is, of course, a spectrum. But that's where a lot of the most radical manifestations of post-liberal politics can end up. I'm interested in post-liberal politics. I want a socialist politics of universal emancipation of both the individual and society. Quite complicated. You can read about it in my book, available online. But the point is, this is something really, really significant. And it's not an accident that fascist talking points and the talking points of Vladimir Putin on this issue overlap with certain British columnists. It's not an accident.